second roundtable organized by Fly Prize and Creative Europe. And today our roundtable dedicated to identity in photography. And we have 4 guests.
Okay, so let me introduce our guests. And first, we have Colin Pantall. I'm really glad that you're here. Colin is a writer, lecturer, and photographer based in Bath. And hello from UK, in Europe. His photographic work focuses on his immediate domestic environment. He also writes for a range of publications, including World Press Photo, the British Journal of Photography, the Photo Monitor, and the Source magazine. He also runs an online series of lectures through the Royal Photographic Society, linking contemporary photography to global historical and theoretical perspectives. And his photography focuses on domestic environments and family, and includes his projects All Quiet on the Home Front, My German Family Album, and their Sofa Portraits. So,
hello, Colin.
Hello, Colin.
Hello, guys.
Then we have our Italian guest, Maria Teresa Salvati. Buongiorno.
Hello.
So Maria Teresa, she's a founder and editor-in-chief at the Slide Luck Editorial, and it's an online and offline platform for contemporary photography and multimedia, promoting social change. And she's a personal branding consultant and teacher. She works with photographers and visual artists to find their spot of beauty, such as their inner voice and their personal motivation that drive their creative practice and helps them to build their identity. Monthly columnist for C41 magazine, where photographers are presented through their Sport of Beauty column. And also she's co-author of the symposium Visualizing Climate Change in partnership with the University of the Arts London, Climate Visuals, and their Park and their 7 Photo Agency. We're really glad that Maria, you're with us.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're very welcome.
Also, we have a photographer, Shadman Shahid. Shadman is a photographer born and raised in Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh. His work is about the precarity of the corporeal and the spiritual human conditions in contemporary society. His photographic methodology walks the line between documentary and fiction, and usually in his work the content drives the aesthetics. He relies heavily on magic realism as a storytelling method. His photographic works have brought him a few accolades, including World Press Photo, Jupe Swart Masterclass, British Journal Photography Wants to Watch in 2016, Brun Emerging Photographer of the Year in 2018, and winner of Fly Prize last year. He is currently based in the Netherlands, working on his personal projects. Prior to moving to the Netherlands, he was a lecturer at the Pashala South Asian Media Institute for 3 years, from where he also obtained his professional photography degree in 2015. He is currently being represented by East Wing Gallery. Thank you, Shadman.
Thank you for having me.
And our fourth guest is Lesia Prokopenko. I'm very happy that Lesia is participating in our roundtable, because she's not exactly from photography field, but she's a researcher and writer with a background in arts based in Kiev. And since 2013, she has been taking part in work of the Institute for Public Art at Shanghai Academy of Fine Arts. She worked as the head of projects at the School of Kiev Biennial 2015, curated and co-organized a number of exhibitions, presented talks at Konstnär, I will never pronounce it, as in Stockholm. In Stockholm, Vinzavod in Moscow, the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, and the New School University Center in New York City. She was a part of the curator workshop in the 10th Berlin Biennale in 2018. She has also translated the 3 ecologies by Felix Guattari into Russian. She is currently studying Chinese philosophy at East China Normal University in Shanghai. Thank you so much for participating.
Thank you, Dima. Thank you.
And we need, because we all, we had 7, I think, lecture, artistic talk, and this is the second round table, and we always forgot to present ourselves. So actually what we are doing here. Together with Asia, we are co-creating Birds in Flight Prize and festival-like activities around it, which includes exhibition and online activities, which is like roundtables and artistic talks. And Asia is a Russian-born but based in Netherlands, Privia, Milan, Privia, London. Artist, working with mockumentary and publishing books and photographing. And she's recently graduated from Royal Academy of Art in The Hague.
Okay. And Dima, he's Ukrainian born.
Okay.
And then Parisian based. Recently he moved back to Paris from the Netherlands, where he also obtained a master program in the Royal Academy of the Arts in The Hague. He's
say something.
Okay.
Photographer and artist, yeah. And working for my
personal projects,
and
well
also
as
with a lot of outlets and media like New York Times or others, but mostly New York Times.
But now for their personal project, he's specializing on topics such as relationships between human and human-like.
Human-like technologies, yeah. Okay, so let's start. And I must say that I'm really surprised. We have a lot of questions. And we will try to combine them and make them smaller. But to start, and also to let you kind of introduce yourself to the audience by yourself, we have a first question. And it sounds quite simple, but I'm sure it's difficult. What does identity means for you, and how it changed or shaped your field for the last 10 years? And so we maybe can start from Colin.
Thank you so much. I had a tutorial.
You're working so hard, so
it's such a bastard question. I had a student the other day, and she's writing an essay, and one of the beginning things was she had this great quote: "Identity is," and it was 2 lines. I've forgotten it. What is identity? How does it change? I think identity, depending on how you kind of construct, it's something imaginary to do with our psychology, our family, our social circle, our community, our national identity, and how we fit in a world. It's affected by everything we see, we read, we're influenced by in art, in culture, in religion. It can be racial, physical, sexual, and it changes and shapes. And it can change and shape how you see the world really quickly. And visual photography can change and shape how you see the world very quickly. For me personally, my change in identity, that's what All Quiet, my book All Quiet on the Home Front was about family and becoming a father, and how that changed identity and changed over time. So yeah, it's complicated.
And Maria Teresa, maybe you can follow this answer, but also because you work as a personal consultant, maybe you also can reflect a little bit on with what requests people come to you when they probably or like have questions about identity.
Yeah, well, I echo what Colin said about it being complicated, but we have to simplify for the time being. And for me, identity is a set of distinguishing characters that define a person or a culture. And if we stay within the field of photography, is also usually we define it with a stylistic signature. For example, this is something that everyone aims for, to have their own signature so they can be recognizable, and you are associated with the signature, and people will recognize you, and in a way it will define your identity. But can also be a set of other things, like could be in your research approach, it could be in the way you approach the subject, it can be in a lot of other things. And once we say that photography is not objective, we know that. So we say, as a consequence, photography is subjective. So what is that influences that subjectivity? And is your story, your personal story. It's about everything that has influenced your personal point of view, the way you see the world. So inevitably is your personal traumas, your knowledge, the relationship with your family, is everything you learn, is the relationship you've had with people. And in the last 10 years, a lot of things have changed. Why? Especially because of the photography schools that have really proliferated all around the world. And often I have my students asking me, why do I need to go back into the intimate and real and profound motivation that drives my creative practice? Why can I not just produce, do whatever I want, and then at a certain point I'll discover who I am? Simply because of the numbers. Because now there are, and it's a good thing for photography, it means that photography is really alive, but there are millions of people, young and less young photographers, that want to make a living out of photography. They want to make photography a real job. So how do you distinguish yourself from everyone else? What is that distinguish you from the other millions of photographers? And that is inevitably in your story. That's the only thing that no one can copy you. Everyone can reference. We will get to this point. Everyone references, everyone can copy, and as a student you have to copy because it's a way to exercise anyway. But the objective should be that one of becoming a reference for someone else, because you have been able to develop your own signature, your own creative practice, and you inspire other people to do things. So that's why most of the people will come to me and say, like, how can I start to build my identity, really? And the first thing I say is turn the camera towards you, because that's the starting point.
Thank you so much. And
I think maybe Lesia can
Lesia,
add.
if you yeah.
Yeah, that's a really exciting topic, and I'm really grateful that you managed to make it the center of our discussion. It's a really great thing you're doing here. What I have to say is that identity is definitely not something that is to be taken for granted, and identities are not something we are born with. They are not something that are naturally attached to us, but they are something that are constantly in the process of being produced, reproduced, and at times imposed on us. So it is very important, whether in arts or in your everyday life, in your understanding of yourself as a political subject, it is very important to recognize all these levels on which identities function. So in the past few years, I've been really interested in the idea of disidentification, which I came across in the works of Paul Preciado. And this term, in fact, was a little earlier established by another researcher named José Esteban Muñoz in the realm of gender identity and gender politics. But there, in one of his works, Paul Preciado, who at the time was Beatriz Preciado, wrote a book on his gender reassignment, this process of his transition. And in this book, he presented some really important reflections of how this disidentification works. This is something I've always found really inspiring, whether in thinking about images or thinking about ideas. So Preciado says that contrary to the idea that our subjectivity is formed when we recognize ourselves in the mirror, for example, the political subjectivity emerges precisely when the subject does not recognize itself in its representation. And here we can, of course, talk about all kinds of representations in media or in arts or any kinds of ideas that we are told to identify with. So Preciado, I'm quoting, calls for not for any direct action against representation, but for a micropolitics of disidentification, a kind of experimentation that does not have faith in representation as an exteriority that will bring truth or happiness. This is very important because, especially if we are talking about photography, here the idea of representation is a central one, and it can often be manipulated, or it can be used for some emancipatory means, and we have to learn to distinguish the way it's used. But apart from, disidentification as a negative gesture, there is another layer of it, and we had quite a few discussions about this with an acquaintance of mine, a very interesting researcher who lives in Berlin. Her name is Antonia Mayecha. So during the Berlin Biennale workshop, we had lots of discussions about this idea of disidentification. And later, Antonia Mayecha wrote an essay where she combined this kind of negative idea of disidentification with a more positive idea of belonging. So as a way to escape this negation that comes out of disidentification. So, and what I really loved about this idea is how Antonia suggested the idea of disidentified belonging. It's really a way to relate to, for instance, the land where you're coming from, to your lineage, to different components of culture that surrounds you, without this rigidity of national identity that is often so destructive, and we see how destructive it can be on some recent, on the example of some recent events in Ukraine and elsewhere as well. So yeah, this is what I have to say about identity for now.
Thank you so much. And I have an additional question following what you told. But before this, Shadman, could you please
reflect?
Yeah, like answer on the same question actually.
Yeah, well, I actually want to start with an admission. Since I lack the capacity to improvise an answer to such a critical question, I have prepared a written response. So I'll read that out. And I apologize. It's going to be
Please
long,
do.
but yeah. So for me, identity is an ideological construct that depends heavily on our material existence for its formation. It is a collection of different sets of values, economic, social, physical, and historical, that come together to form a semi-solid, often mercurial, construction which is generally misconstrued as being concrete and final. It is a link between an individual's past to their present, and it serves to anticipate their actions in the future. It is an attempt to find a shape for an individual that can fit in the ever-morphing jigsaw, which is our society. Although identity can and often is perceived subjectively, it cannot exist independently, isolated from the society. It is formed as a result of a constant give and take between individuals and masses through various forms of spoken, unspoken, written, unwritten social agreements and dialogues. Although the concept of identity probably has existed for as long as language has, and perhaps even longer, the invention of photography must have changed drastically the elements that make up the formation and perception of identity. As we all know, the photographic expression is a visual process and heavily dependent on only one of our senses, namely the sense of vision. Therefore, the construction and perception of identity becomes more grounded in the material world through photographs. The identity then is formed by the physical, and as an extension, the geopolitical space an individual exists in. It is formed by the color of their skin, the shape of their nose, the length of their beard, the shape of their body, their visible actions, the clothes that they wear, the emblems they use to represent themselves. So only the visual expressions and their ocular perceptions are part of the equation, and anything that is not visible is lost. The identity formed through only photography does not take into account an individual's non-visual or non-material characteristics, such as their smell, for example, or how they feel to touch, the emotions that they experience but do not emote, the language that they're speaking in, or even their thoughts and ideas. Therefore, all thoughts and ideologies must be expressed through a series of signs and symbols that are later decoded by the viewer. The reliance on our visual senses to form and perceive identity perhaps existed long before photography, but I doubt that it was ever this all-encompassing. I'm sure I don't have to go into details about photography's capacity for mass distribution of ideas and realities, and how that affects the formation of identities or the making of grand narratives that create stereotypes. To answer the second part of your question, I only want to share what I see happening now. I see now in the photographic world an increasing need to understand one's own practice, to be conscious of the consequences of one's actions. We are realizing even more the power an image can have over the audience and how that can be sometimes misused purposefully or by accident. Therefore, we think more before we act, before we start taking images of quote-unquote others. Of course, I'm generalizing, but I think we are moving towards a more conscious photographic practice. Not only do we think about the identity of the subjects, but we also question the identity of the photographer.
Okay, thank you, Shadman.
That's what I have.
Following this, I will ask one. I'm super super happy that like you're so prepared, and I also will ask like some much easier question and yeah, also about format. I didn't tell that. Let's try to keep our answers like in like 2, 3, 4 minutes maximum, so it will be more like a discussion than like one and then another. And I have one question. Maybe Lesia, it goes more for you as a specialist in the culture, but like obviously everybody will have opinion about this. So before we started, like we were like just for our audience, we were speaking a little bit, and I think Maria Teresa, you told that this is such a hot question, like about identity, right? But people are thinking about identity all the history. But what happening now exactly that it makes this question so hot? You know, we see so many movements, we see so many, you know, even about food, you know, about like simple stuff, you know. I opened New York Times and like I saw 2 articles dedicated to food, but which shows a huge identity conflict. One is going on in Rome. It's actually about how to cook carciofi. Carciofi is artichoke.
Artichokes.
And yes, artichokes. So, and it's like Jew community in Rome who cook carciofi their way for many years. And one of rabbi from Israel told, no, you cook it wrong way. And you imagine if somebody tells Italian that they cook not in proper way. So
let's make a movement.
and then I open again New York Times and I see, because we're in Kiev now, and I see an article about borscht, which is like national traditional soup, and Ukraine like deciding on this March apply to UNESCO, I guess, to make it national heritage, and of course some other countries like Russia, for example, saying no, it's not only your heritage, it's our common heritage, or it's all. So I mean, before, you know, like why these questions do not appear like 10 years ago, 5 years ago? Why all of them appears now?
Is a question for me or for
I mean, everybody can answer, but
I can add a couple. I mean, I was talking. Sorry, I just took over from you, Maria. I was talking to somebody from Singapore, and they were talking about Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei and Indonesia. And the one time they were united was when, on a British TV show called called MasterChef, they cooked something called rendang, which is beef cooked in coconut, buffalo meat cooked in coconut, and they said it was not crisp enough. And everybody in Southeast Asia said rendang is not crisp. And I think it's just because of the internet and because of communication. And it's something to kind of cling to. I don't know. But food as identity is just, I find it really absolutely fascinating. And also because people are kind of using it as a class mark. In the UK, food is a complete class marker. It's a marker of your economic status. It's the marker of your sophistication. It's a marker of where you've traveled. It's a marker of authenticity. And that's something people seize. And food is the ultimate idea of authenticity. And I think that's what you're kind of connecting to with the rabbi and the borscht and the artichokes.
Okay.
Perhaps. Yeah, if I can add something, it's sure, definitely. Sure. It's about being all very connected and people traveling all around the world. And when you have all this kind of interlacing of different communities and cultures together, there will be also a conversation, if you want, about the ideas of one another. So I think from a photographic point of view, for example, it becomes more and more important, the ethical approach to what you see and what you show, because when you enter a new community, new culture, you have to be careful of how you represent what you see. But then, because of a lot of people example, traveling and seeing new things. It's there is we see a lot of representations. We see a lot of stereotypes. We see a lot of a representation of a singular elements of each community, of each culture. And so, of course, you know, some people that are resident where the person that the foreigners is coming might feel a little bit disrespected because you haven't represented properly what they have lived. So I think it's very normal as a consequence of this super interconnected world, and there's so many with the internet, as Colin was saying, which is the same thing, you know, it's just an online version of what happens anyway offline. We are all connected, and we've seen how much we are connected. And so this will be more and more something to reflect on and something to be very careful in the representation of other cultures.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Lesia, do you want to add something maybe?
Yeah, I do have a couple of words to add to that. Because can you hear me well?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Sorry, I just you were listening so attentively. I thought there was something wrong with the sound.
No, everything is
so,
great.
In addition to this interconnected world, there are a few issues that arise with that. One of them is that the idea of diversity and the idea of this Babylonian world in which, you know, this cultural melting pots, etc., this idea of diversity is really being instrumentalized very often in not really nice ways. By which I mean that when we're claiming the value of diversity, we often forget about the fact that there are hierarchies within it, and that the existence of a diverse community does not guarantee that this community is equal. And this has been a big problem in, for instance, Western liberal democracies who have been promoting this idea of diversity, which for some people has already become like a cuss word. If you say something diverse, they are going to be offended and say, like, what are you talking about? All these identity politics. And so identity politics is the second problem here, because it started as, you know, an emancipatory idea that all these different identities, for instance, different gender identities, different ethnicities, national identities, whatever, they can all flourish and occupy their equal place in this beautiful liberal world of diversity. But we all understand that it doesn't happen this way. And not only that, but also this desire to have this world of equal identities actually makes them very rigid and makes you the slave of this framework of identities. So you have to choose which identity you represent. Are you representing Ukraine, or are you representing women, or are you representing this or that? So it doesn't really match the realities of how we live oftentimes. That's the problem.
Okay, thank you so much. And we have a case from our readers, which we would love to read fully, and then maybe you can respond for this, because we think it's quite
relevant.
Yeah, relevant.
So, there, I don't know if it is a guy or girl. We have a response from Malaysia. So Malaysia is known as a nation with a diverse ethnic and culture. Despite its diversity in race, Malaysians are are said to be able to live with each other in harmonic ways. This harmony in diversity of ethics and cultures has always been a selling point for this country to promote tourism on the international level. However, beyond that layer, to trained eye, it is obvious that the majority race, the Malay, are always in power and in control of other races. In their Malay are the ones with political advantages and hold the top positions in government for the last 60 years. Though policies and other methods, the other races such as the Indian and the Chinese are kept in check to ensure that their cultures are assimilated with the Malays culture, which 60 years later became the national identity. This can be seen though other practices such as in art, films, education, and many more. So when speaking about the nation, I find it hard to capture the identity of the nation in a single word, and even in this craft we know as photography. Coming from the majority, how I'm able to see from the other perspective without the racial basis. How do we capture the identity? If we manage to do so, then how would the identity be projected or shown in our photography? Could it be misinterpreted? If so, it is absolutely fine to misinterpret it from the original intention of the artist. This is some of the key questions that I'm hoping to be able to answer, or at least get some clue in joining the discussion. Thank you very much.
So it's long, but I think you get it.
Shall I take a stab at that first, if it's okay with
Sure,
everyone?
Okay.
absolutely, Shadman, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I think it's most important that to realize the photographer's intention here, and I think that's commendable. First, to begin with, that the photographer is thinking about um, thinking about such issues before going out and taking pictures. This is the first step, I think. Secondly, I think Lesia mentioned it before about the dangers and the destructive nature of national identity. So first of all, I think I would look into that first. Is it really necessary to kind of build and propagate this idea of national identity or not? Does it do us any good at all or not? And I think also the photographer has a really unrealistic goal in a way. I don't think what they're looking to achieve is actually possible or quite realistic, and they should be fine with the fact that it's not. I think one way to achieve what they are trying to achieve is through collaboration. I don't think it's if they're really interested in telling diverse stories and getting multiple perspectives into the story. I think collaboration is key for doing such a project. So not to take the onus of telling the entire nation's story on one's shoulder, but to find different allies to tell stories through different perspectives. And of course, I don't think it's ever possible to shift your perspective completely to the point of view of the other, and tell their story from that point of view. And I think it's more efficient, and it's better if you go with the realization that you're telling a story from your point of view, and be very clear with the audience that this is an outsider's point of view. Because I also do not believe that we are not allowed to tell stories of other people. I think we should all tell each other's stories, but we should be clear of our position in that story and our intent in that story, and our point of view in that story. So can it be misinterpreted? I think yes, definitely it can. Is it absolutely fine? I wouldn't use the word absolutely, but I would try my best to make sure that it is interpreted as I have intended it to be, especially when it comes to such a sensitive topic as identity.
Okay, thank you,
Okay,
Shadman.
thank you.
Does anybody wants to add something?
Yeah,
Well,
I think.
I think everyone
Okay.
wants that.
Go on, Teresa.
Who is the first?
Colin was the
please.
first.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's a really difficult question, and Malaysia has a mix of ethnic Malays, Chinese, and Indians, and it's a really complex mix. And in that, and the whoever posed the question is ethnic Malay, and in that mix, there are various privileges and histories that come into play, where education, language, power, and religion all combined. So I think it's a great thing to do to try to. I don't know if you can find what your national identity is, because it might be confused, it might be weird, it might be difficult, it might be complex, it might be contradictory, and I think you should look at those from your own perspective, but also by going out as Shadman said, and finding out whose stories do you want to tell. And also possibly, as Lesia said, that a little bit of disidentification, or identifying what you identify with as a pre-Boomi person, identifying how you identify and where that comes from. I think that would be really, really interesting. In Malaysia, I know that art has been used as a political tool to kind of back up Malaysian identity, power, and combine it with religion. And I know that in Southeast Asia has, in the last 20 years, has been quite a major thing, and has come through museums there. So I think it's a really, really, really good thing to do. But I'll just echo what Shadman says. There was a great thing, which I'm just looking at it now. It was in Dyslexia, and it was looking at how do you tell stories of other people. And it's a kind of checklist. And it starts off, if you're specifically looking to tell the stories of Indians and Chinese, or native, or Aboriginal people in Malay, the checklist kind of starts, are you part of the minority you're writing about? And the answer goes, yes, keep up the good work. If the no, do you have access to people who are part of this minority? And are you willing to ask questions and do research? If the answer is no, please reconsider your stance. Writing truly diverse characters, or photographing truly diverse characters, and representing them comes from learning about others. If the answer is yes, good, you're headed in the right direction. Now, is your character's story directly related to their experience as a minority? Yes, please take a step back and think about why you feel qualified to write about this experience. If the answer is no, all right, are they the only character in the story representing their minority? And if the answer is yes, well, what the fuck? If the answer is no, good, and so on. So it's a kind of very simple checklist for bringing people into your story and helping tell those stories and represent those stories. So I would look at it from that perspective. I think it's very difficult. I don't think you can find a national identity, because I don't think there is one. I don't think I'm from England. I'm from the UK. Our national identity, I really don't know. I'm really confused. It's at the moment it's quite stupid, but it changes really, really quickly. And it depends on class, it depends on ethnicity, it depends on whether you live in the countryside or the city. So embrace the complexity, I would say, but yeah, find the people that you want to photograph and talk to them, and maybe disidentify with some of the, I love that, with some of the ideas that might be predominant in Malaysia at the time being.
Thank you so much. I really love this checklist. It's like very practical, and I think like
I can send it. I can send it
no,
to you
no,
if you like.
it was please do. It was Lesia who wanted to add also something.
Yeah, just a little thing. I really, really agree with what Shadman said, and thanks Scott for elaborating on that. But oh, sorry, not Scott, Colin. God, I have. I was talking to a Scott today, so I keep calling everybody Scott. Colin, of course. Yeah, but what I wanted to add to Shadman's answer is that also we have to take into account that in image making we not only reflect somebody's identity or what was it in the question, project or show an identity, but we also construct an identity with this image production. So this is something we also have to keep in mind, that we are not just showing something objectively, we are contributing to the construction of this thing. Yeah.
I think,
just a very quick thing.
sorry,
Of course, I completely agree with everything that Colin and Shadman said. I just want to point the attention on the question that the person that asked the question posed on, and which was coming from majority. How am I able to see from the other's perspective without racial biases? Well, I think this is the key question. You don't see you don't see from others' point of view. You can only see from your point of view. So the question is, what you stand for? What is truthful to your way of seeing? And also once you understand what you stand for, and so what you want to represent is not an external view. If you really want to be truthful to the story you're telling, you need to work with the subject. So the real question should be, how can I learn from people how they live in that context? And the answer will be definitely not stereotyped, because you have worked with people. There is a very recent project which I really love, not only because it's part of the Everything is Connected call by Zedlak editorial, but because it's really a great project by Misha Vallejo, is The Secret of Sarayaku. Is a work is done with Native America in Colombia, in Ecuador, sorry, in the Ecuadorian Amazon, and well, you can go and have a look. But apart from what the story, he really works with people, trying to understand how they can represent themselves. He also has opened a blog where the kids and the young people send him photos. So it's a step further. It's really working in a participatory narration of the story. It's not an external view or a majority view going into a place and try to represent something. It's really a collaborative effort, and this is the only way not to risk of representing stereotypes. So it requires your full understanding of what you stand for, what ethical values are, what's your spot of beauty, which is what your intimate personal motivation for doing what you do, and learning about your subject. So it's a research process. It's not about going with the preconception and try to represent that. It's about learning what's happening in that place, and you can only do it by collaboration.
Wow, thank you so much. I think it's a really important addition, and I would love more and more, especially media, would use these methods, during their work, not just go as and do what they're expecting to see from the places. And thank you for being so practical, because we have a lot of not even young artists, but people who start to photograph or like start their career, and they want to rebuild it. So, and they always ask for being like practical. So the next question, I think, like it was really to Maria Teresa, to you, like because I'm sure you heard this question a lot of times. So it's sounds like this. Yeah.
Can I just add something really quickly on collaboration?
Sure.
And if you're collaborating with a group or a community, it's always worth thinking as well, who is your entry point in that group? So who are you actually collaborating with, and whose voice, whose version, whose story are you telling? Because it's not always the person that you think it is.
It's really important to add. So our last question is like, okay, I will read it. From worker to artist, how to restart your language and process after 10 years working for others. Actually, if I understand right, it's somebody who was working in completely another field, or just being a like commercial photographer, or like working for during assignment, and now somebody wants to establish himself as an artist and make this switch. What would you recommend? How to do it? How to find your identity as an artist?
I guess the thing is the same for everyone. Turn the camera towards yourself. Try and understand who you are, why you want to be an artist. So there is an Imitation quotation from Duan Michals that says, don't try to be an artist, find the things within yourself that needs to be expressed. You might find is art. So you need to first of all understand what is your story, what is that you have to say, do you have something to say, and then experiment. This is a very important thing, just like experiment in trying to do different things, also as a way to break the kind of the rules that you have set in your mind in these 10 years working for other people. So obviously if someone gives you a brief, it's you know what you have to do, so you have a set rules of things that you are used to do. So in order to go back, because you almost have to do a step back and go out of the rules and just establish your own rules, you need to experiment, you need to make mistakes, you need to learn, you need to study. There is no one, I'm sure, like other people that have been dealing with great photographers all around the world, I never talked with a great photographer that I found it a boring person. So a great photographer is also a person that is knowledgeable, that has traveled, that knows about things, that is not always aware about who you are, but definitely has a profound knowledge of what's happening in the world, and everything that is behind really then is expressed in your way of seeing. So it's about studying, it's about breaking rules, it's about turning the camera to yourself, understand who you are and what is the story that you have to tell.
Thank you so much. Unless somebody wants to add, we can go to another question, but if you have something to add.
I just want to add something very specific. I completely agree with everything that was just said by Maria. It's very, very important to do all of that. Otherwise, it's not possible. But one very specific thing that can be done is, if you think the leap from doing something for 10 years to doing something completely experimental is too much, it's too big a leap to make. You can start by deconstructing what you've been doing so far. So not starting something completely new, but looking at the stuff that you've been making for others more critically and from a different perspective, not from the perspective of someone who's doing a job or an employee, but from the perspective of a creative or a maker, and really criticize and be critical of what you've made and completely deconstruct it and destroy it, take it apart, part by part. And in that process, you cleanse yourself, I think, from what you've been doing before, and at the same time you figure out what is the new step that you're going to take, and what is the new identity that you're going to take upon. I think that's one specific thing that can be done. Yeah.
I'll add something as well, if I may.
Sure. Please go ahead, Colin.
Yeah, at the same time, it's kind of creating. It can be intellectual, it can be physical, it can be to do with nature, it can be musical. It can relate to storytelling and film. So kind of enjoy yourself and experiment. And to a certain extent, save the thing till later. The later you're just starting out. If you're starting creating for yourself and you've been creating already, find something that gives you some kind of joy in life. Because that's the first thing, and then think about it later and analyze it and think of how you can, which is not to say don't study, do study, but maybe turn that part of the brain. Everything. The problem with identity is it's all kind of in that intellectual part of the brain, and that's not necessarily the part of the brain that makes great photography or great art. So to a certain extent as well, stop thinking too much about it, stop worrying too much about it, and just get making. It might be that you have something you're really tactile and good with your hands, or might be that you're working with sculpture and books and you're very physical, and can make something that is more intuitive. So sort of thinking and research part there, but also think about all those other aspects of yourself. Where do you fit in? What kind of person are you? It is that, but think about the pleasure of it as well.
Thank you. Could I also add something? Because it's funny, because this question, it could be like question from me like several years ago, and
like 2 years ago.
Yeah, and I was asking it the same, like how
all the time.
Yeah, like
I swear.
how to restructure your daily routine and everything. And as Shadman told, like you really deconstruct, but also it sounds a little bit very dramatic and depressive, that like, okay, I should ruin all my world, which is not true, because like at the beginning you start to kind of really like saying no to everything what you can do, but then you realize that like all of us, I'm pretty sure, have our strengths field, and like we just to finding the new balance of what is really strong. And I think what Colin told, like about like loving something. I have a friend who was a photographer for years, and also in the side he was doing aquariums for himself, and he saw that this aquariums is actually like completely aside things, and then he started to photograph them.
Aquarium photography.
Yeah, and like it's completely new things, and he becomes so like passionate about it, and people starting to be so interesting, because like this was his passion, which he always put aside. And but then he found, as you told Colin, like he found that like it's really something what motivates him. Okay, we have another question.
Sorry, Dave, I just want to respond to what you just said.
Yeah, sure.
I don't think the process of deconstruction necessarily needs to be depressing. It can be very, very rewarding. Try to, it depends on the person, But of course, I mean, there's no set rules. The answer I was giving was specifically to someone who wants to completely restart their language. But definitely, there's no set rules. You really have to understand who you are, and maybe you find enjoyment in deconstructing stuff,
From my side,
good point.
From my side, I could also add that it might be very depressing when you're pretending to be somebody else and trying to copy the parts of I don't know, your
somebody who expecting something from you.
Yeah.
Because you even respect them, but like you think, oh, this is the people who I really like. And you, but yeah, I understand you.
Yeah, but Asia, you always try to be someone else.
No.
What are you talking about?
She's many people. I've got a question. Does everybody here on the panel and the interview, is it? And do you all deconstruct yourself on a fairly regular basis anyway? Do you all examine what you do to go, what the fuck am I doing? Do you do this?
Not all the time. No. I allow also for mistakes and not analyzing everything. Yeah. Otherwise, my God, how hard is life like that?
Yeah.
Okay,
otherwise,
guys, let's go to
every couple of years, I try to do a balance.
For me,
reset.
Yeah.
Our next question is actually about the copy. and how to find the balance between the reference and the copy, and especially for example, appropriation, the cultural appropriation. Is it bad, or it's something that let different cultures understand each other? What do you think about it?
I will add just a little bit about the second part, about if appropriation is bad or something that let different cultures understand each other. We get a very interesting case from Kazakhstan, and the guy told, like, look, we are one of the republic which used to be USSR, and like all our culture is actually appropriation of different small things from all other republic of USSR, and without this appropriation we would completely do not understand each other. So what's wrong with it? And so maybe we can speak a little bit about like advantages and disadvantages of this.
And also, I would say there are a lot of debates and conflicts about the reference and the copy in itself. For example, the recent case from World Press Photo is exactly about this topic, from one photojournalist who copied with the same topic the other photojournalist who did well.
But now you told that he was copying, like World Press Photo told that this was not a copy,
Yeah,
but in the internet it was another opinion. So like,
how to deal with this?
No, it's not about how to deal. It's more about like advantages and disadvantages of like copying and references and like appropriation.
So, who wants to start?
Who wants to start?
I could start a little bit.
Lesia, please.
You know, there is in art, there has always been this very strong idea of having a tradition and having teachers and students, and in some ways, for example, if we talk about religious paintings of Orthodox icons, for instance, there is no such thing as copy being something bad. On the other hand, on the contrary, when you're copying, you have to really stick to the traditional rules and regulations that then allow you to confer something in this image, to make this image work. So copy has not always been something bad. It can also indicate the respect to the tradition, or it can indicate the student-master relationships. And also in these rigid frameworks, sometimes this is where the possibility for experiment emerges, because innovation is not something that just starts from zero, that is born from nothing. It is born from experiment within the given frameworks. So I would say that in certain ways, copying can also be a legitimate way to learn and to create, but we of course have to understand what kind of copying we're talking about. And as for appropriation, it's of course it's a different question, but I just have something very brief to add to this. If we talk about appropriation, there's one particular thing we have to keep in mind. Are we talking about the more or less equal exchange between different, let's say, cultures? Or are we talking about someone coming from a privileged position who is borrowing or stealing or acquiring from someone who is hierarchically lower, or in a more precarious social class, etc. position. So that's one thing about appropriation that we have to keep in mind.
Thank you so much.
That's yeah. Is it? There's. I mean, I'd echo what was said. There's always been cultural appropriation. There's always been a fertilization of ideas and images. And if you look at Japan's a great example. We don't really consider it because it's like Lesia said, it's that dominant culture and subordinate culture. Where's the appropriation coming from? But Japan, if you think of floating world imagery, they took mentions and they transferred that. And then Japanese images came into European painting. In photography, people like William Klein influenced all the photographers. So Daido Moriyama and Nakahira. So in photography, we had appropriation going both ways. And it's, I think it's really, really difficult. And appropriation, cultural appropriation is kind of often divided into, very simplistically, into kind of subject, content, and object. Subject is when you take a person and you represent them. So it's that kind of exotic, National Geographic, that anthropological thing. Content is when you take music or you take a design and you appropriate it. And then object is when you take a sculpture. And I think in photography, there is subject appropriation. There is that sense of exoticizing people, of simplifying the narrative. And it comes back to how good is the story you're telling and whose story is it? And if you're not going back to the checklist and the collaboration that we talked about earlier, comes back to that. If you're representing people, what story are you telling? Is it a good story? And if you're reducing people to kind of a few simplistic kind of symbols of exoticism, then it's probably not a very good story. And that's quite a simple way of putting it. But yeah, go back to the kind of checklist of collaboration and consent that Shadman mentioned earlier, and that could help avoid that problem. Maybe. But then it's also about who's telling the stories and get those stories out and get different people telling different viewpoints on the world, and that's really important.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I? Yeah, just I mean, everything that has been said. Of course, it's appropriation has been existing since the beginning of civilization. If we think about the Roman Empire, appropriated most of the Greek culture and on the mythologic culture. But the problem is that often appropriation is associated with the colonialism because of the occupation that happens from one party to the other and the shift of possession of some cultural heritage without the permission of the original occupant. And I think this is the problem, is the permission, is about acknowledging where the source of that appropriation is. And so I think it becomes a problem when it's just, in this kind of a copy, is a stealing, without acknowledging the origin of your work. But but per se, appropriation is not a bad thing. Actually, can be part of the creative process, but it needs to be, in a way, transformative compared to the original work, and you need to acknowledge that it's almost like a consequence. It comes from, and you need to recognize where that comes from in order to be something that is not necessarily related to something bad.
Thank you so much. We have next question, which is Shadman, do you want to add something?
Well, not so much, because I completely agree with everything that has been said. I just wanted to add to what Lesia was saying earlier, to the idea of copying. Actually, it comes the rejection, the desire to reject the idea of copying comes from the desire to be an individual. I think that's something that's important to understand, and that is what drives originality, I think. But it's not necessarily always important or necessary to be an individual all the time. So if you look at most of Eastern art history, if you look at sculptures or paintings, there's not so much of an evolution as you would see in the West. You would kind of mold or sculpt the same sculpture over and over with really, really tiny changes over the centuries, and that was the practice, because the representation was so complete and unchangeable that you were kind of not allowed to even think about changes. And also, like, the signing of the images, when you paint an image, that if you look at Eastern art history, there's in a very broad general term, you wouldn't find a lot of signed images where the artist has signed their names, because the purpose of art was completely different. It was because of more of a meditative practice and more self-reflective, more than anything else. So I think this desire, we also need to be very conscious of this desire to be an individual. And why do we copy? Also, are we copying in order to learn or to understand a process better, or are we copying because we see that this person is getting a lot of attention, or all the basic human necessities, like social acceptance and so on and so forth? If that is the reason, then definitely it's wrong. It's wrong in an ethical point of view. It's wrong for your own self-development. It's wrong in all ways imaginable. But if the copying and referencing is being done in order to understand the process better and to understand your practice better, then I think it's completely okay. And in terms of appropriation, I think I don't have anything else to add to what everyone else said. I completely agree with them.
Has anybody seen anything original this year?
Yeah, this I have
It's
actually.
quite original, no?
Go on, Mark. Go on, Mark. Yeah, go on.
Well, this
But that's also a
the
copy
the
of
exhibition
the
that
other.
Asya and Dima are doing. It's quite original, I think. It's only possible because of
Yeah.
the situation we're put in. No, I'm very serious about this. I haven't seen
Absolutely.
anything like
Great.
this before. Yeah.
Thank you, Shadman.
Well,
Didn't
it
know
might be
it's me.
because sorry.
Yeah, Maria Teresa, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was saying it must be because I work with students, and so I know them from inside out. I really know their stories. I know their perspective. I know their point of view intimately. I always see new things because I see through their eyes, and so I can see that often we say everything has been already said and done with photography. I don't agree, because there will be as many stories as many eyes that will see that story, because if people really become aware of what they are seeing through their own intimate personal perspective. And again, I just want to add something I didn't say before, because it's important. When we say subjectivity, it doesn't mean that I do whatever I want just based on my story, because that story needs to be credible, needs to be authentic, and needs to be ethical, needs to have ethical values that carries with them. So it's really if you have something to say, you are aware of who you are, and you approach the story in a certain way, yes, we can be surprised still.
Thank you. I'm completely agree with you. Like, when I look at the student, and I was like the same as Shadman, I was teaching before and then studying. Like, I always surprised. I completely don't understand this paradigm when people saying like, "Oh, your new generation is doing boring things, repeating." Completely no. Like, and
Well, it depends, I would say.
Yeah, of course it depends. It's not, of course, again, on a big number, you can't have all, famous
All
great
original.
photographers, but there is because if it comes from a really a specific unique point of view, you can see that there is still a lot of things to say.
Of course.
So our next question is actually really about identity, like literally, and it goes really from photography. So but influence all society. You will understand. Right? So selfies in opposition to self-portrait influence idea of identity in photography and society. Do I need to repeat
Who
it?
is this
How
question for?
selfies influence idea of identity in photography and society. So actually, we answered the question of Instagram technologies and all this pictures.
Well, in a
With the
selfie,
selfie sticks, yeah. And how
is
people
a selfie is a selfie a self-portrait? What kind of level 4 of simulacrum, where it's a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy?
Exactly. A copy with filters.
A copy with
Oh,
filters, yeah.
Shadman
Absolutely.
can tell a lot about this.
Well,
Because
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if this is going to be very productive, Dima. This question, because it's such a big topic. Because you bring in Instagram as well, and we have been talking about representation and representation of others, and now it has become this. Selfies have become this illusion of representing yourself, but at the same time, because Colin mentions simulacra. It is a simulacrum. It's not something that you have a referent in real life. It's something you see, and it's something that you're being told to do. But at the same time, you feel that you are you have the power to represent yourself. And in the process, what's happening is basically you're submitting to this method and way of kind of uh, being manipulated by an external force to decide what your identity should be. So it's even worse, I think, in some ways, than being misrepresented by someone else, because now you don't even realize that you are not actually representing who you are.
wow, this is really meta, Shadman, but this is what this is really nice. Lesia, could you maybe as a culturologist, like how society maybe influence society somehow? Like, is it any researches about this?
I'm pretty sure there are, but I wouldn't be able to think off the top of my head of something like that. All I wanted to say in that regard is that just like pretty much everything, selfies or like any kind of our on media self-representation online can have many different dimensions, and it can be used in pretty harmful ways, but it can also be used in emancipatory ways and in the ways that are simply fun. And this kind of the fun it implies can also open a lot of things. I think selfies in some ways can produce this great source of self-irony, and sometimes even this kind of productive disidentification that I was talking about. Because if I'm not satisfied with the way I'm being represented, I start playing with the ways I can represent myself, or at least it's, you know, there's something about this. It's about the way we use different tools. Like sometimes using social media can be a little bit like, you know, taking over the master's tools and doing something fun with them. So I guess it's not that tragic. It just depends on how you use it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It made me think. It made me think. It made me think what Lesia just said about Cindy Sherman, because she's been always doing selfies and self-portraits, and now she's using social media, doing selfies in a very creative way, very ironic, very fun way, and what to say. It's such a broad topic. It's of course I'm not against social media, because I teach also how to use social media, and I'm aware of the good and bad things that social media do. The selfie is a representation of something that doesn't exist most of the time, and you feel the need to public and to tell other people about who you are in a way, but then reality often is not exactly like you publish or you post on social media. And this opens a lot of questions about identity, young people, how they need to represent themselves compared to their real lives, and all this kind of this content that happens between real and not real. It's a really broad cultural topic, but I think for the sake of this conversation, I think we can leave it here.
Okay, thank you.
I just ask, do we post selfies of ourselves, and do we ever post selfies and then erase selfies on Instagram? Has anyone ever done that apart from me?
Never.
Yeah.
About what? Can you repeat the question?
Do you ever post selfies of yourself on social media, on Instagram or any other social media? Do you ever erase selfies once you've posted them? And what do you post of them? And what's the image that you're trying to create? What's the fabrication? Yeah, we all do. We all know. But then we can ask ourselves, what is the fabrication that we're
sometimes it's simply our. Sometimes it's simply our moment of weakness, where we need approval from the public, and we need likes to say that we are cool. Come on, it's fine. We are all fragile. It's okay. It's okay to be weak and fragile as well sometimes.
Especially in the times.
Then I have a question to Shadman. Why you've never posted any selfies on your social media?
No, I was joking about that. Of course, I've posted self-portraits. It's not a selfie. I try not to post a selfie which I just look at everyone doing, like the duck face Colin was doing right now. I try not to do that, and it makes me very uncomfortable, even experimenting with it. So it's really a kind of personal to me. But I really appreciate what Lesia is saying about taking over the tool of the master in a way. But I think it's also this idea only exists in an ideological realm for now, in general. But it would be really, really interesting if people started to understand it as such. Yeah, that's what I just wanted to say.
Okay, thank you so much. We actually have only 4 minutes left, but I think we really, this 1 hour and a half was really intense. Like I personally feel like tired, like, I mean, in a good way, like, and I must say, just we really have a lot of questions, and like I'm sorry for some people whose question we couldn't ask, but also because some of them are so broad, like about religion, nudity, like commercial advertising, like it's like they're so huge that we can't go through all these topics. But we were trying to find some angles which are not so much discussable in public, and we also were trying to speak both like in general but also practical, and I hope it was useful. And I want to say like massive thank you to all of you. It was, for me personally, it was so interesting, like, and I feel like it was interesting every minute. It was no, like, it was all very
Thank you very much.
It was very good for us as well to learn from other perspectives as well. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank
It was
Thank you.
educational for me. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and we would love to say thank you to Birth and Flight and Creative Europe again for all the organizing all these artistic talks and round tables.
So thank you very much.
Thank
and
you.
Unfortunately,
Thank you.
fortunately for somebody, that was our last round table and the last talk with Colin. And that's the ending of our Bird and Flight Prize program.
Online program, but we'll have an exhibition which will be installed, which we started to install right after this round table. And
good luck.
And we will inform you with information about it through all our possible
with
channels.
the service. With our service.
Yeah, fantastic.
Thank you very much and have a good evening.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Pleasure
you.
to meet
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye.